Our next speakers are both from the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and they're experts in issues surrounding aviation obstructions, such as tower cranes, of course. Michael Helvey is manager of the Obstruction Evaluation Group based in Washington, D.C., and he's 25 years' experience in managing aviation operations, including 20 years with the US Air Force. His co-speaker today is Mike Blaich, the Airspace specialist in Florida for the Obstruction Evaluation Group. Mike's been with the FAA since 1982. Their topic is navigating the FAA's construction evaluation process. Please welcome them to the stage.
Let's see if the mic's working. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And I'd like to say thank you to Murray for inviting us. Thank you to the Specialized Carrier and Rigging Association for even suggesting that the Federal Aviation Administration comes to this gathering. I am Mike Helvey. This is Mike Blaich. Heard our introductions. Let me ask one question. Who flew here? Okay, we have a lot of interest in aviation and aviation safety. And technology, my apologies. Last year, the air traffic control system handled over 53 million operations, and we have 6,000 public use airports. We also have 14,000 private use airports in the United States. Is the volume okay? I feel like I'm cutting out. Good. Our mission is very complex. If you just think about Miami International, it's a very complex and dynamic environment, but our mission is very clear. That's to make sure that grandma gets home safely. It's to make sure that every one of you gets home safely. Let me ask you another question. Who here's company files notice with the FAA for the tower cranes? Okay, there's some interest in here, and that's really what I want to talk to. Our goal here is to increase compliance and also explain a little bit about our process and how we do business. So today I'm going to talk about our authority, where that derives from, your responsibilities as sponsors putting things up in the air that we're concerned about, what we do with the information you give us, a little bit about our process and what you can expect, and then I want to get to the questions and answers. And I'm going to go pretty quickly, so just bear with me because I really want to get to the questions and answers. Our authority derives from Title 49, U.S. Code 44718. All that says is the FAA has authority over making decisions to manage the airspace. It's a vital national resource. Now, Title 14, Part 77, that is the one that says you, if you're putting something up in the air that's near an airport or over 200 feet tall, has to notify the FAA 45 days prior to building. It also gives us standards that we use to evaluate things that are going up in the air. And so when we talk about breaking imaginary surfaces off in the airport, that comes from Part 77. So what are your responsibilities? One responsibility, file notice 45 days prior. Now 45 days is what the law says. We will take notice anytime that you know latitude, longitude, surface elevation, and how tall you're going. The sooner the better, particularly if you're in a congested place. New York City, yeah. Florida, anywhere close to an airport, the sooner the better. You're required to file notice when you're close to the airport navigation facility, any structure over 200 feet tall or when requested. Now, the neat thing is you may not know that you're near a navigation facility that a crane could interrupt the signal on. So we have a notice criteria tool, real easy to go to. Our website's listed there, oeaa.faa.gov. On the left side of the page, a whole bunch of buttons, so you have to really look for it. It says notice criteria tool. When you go there, you see a form that looks like this. You put in the lat long, the surface elevation, the height, and it'll tell you file notice, don't file notice. Now, if the permitting office requires you to file notice with the FAA, I recommend you print the page that says you do not need to file notice and submit it with your paperwork. If it's over 200 feet tall, which I assume most of these are, you're going to have to file notice, so don't even worry about that if it's over 200 feet tall. So your responsibilities, you have one responsibility. File notice 45 days prior. It's a foot stomper. After that, you're required to provide additional information if we ask. For example, we might see the surface elevation and say, that doesn't make any sense. We show that this is on top of a mountain, it's 100 feet higher than you're telling us. We'll ask you for some additional information. You'll come back and say, whoops, fat fingered it, or maybe, hey, we cut the top of the mountain off. Okay, that explains it. You're also required to notify us of any changes, construction start, or reaching the final height. And in the business of tower cranes, jump schedules may become very important for us. Mike will talk a little bit more about that. You're required to respond to a notice of presumed hazard, and that'll be in the next slide. But you have to respond, or else we'll just terminate the case after about 60 days. Not hearing anything because we figure you lost interest. You're required to mark and light anything that we tell you in the determination, put red lights on it, whatever the case may be, depending on how tall it is, and then request extensions. Our determinations are good for 18 months. During that time, we kind of reserve that airspace. But if you don't tell us you started construction, it'll terminate after 18 months. But if you let us know beforehand you need an extension, we can approve one extension for an additional 18 months before you start construction. Now, once you start to go vertical, and in the second responsibility there, you told us that construction started, there's no termination date. Once you start going vertical, we consider that the structure is there. So what we do, when we get the information properly submitted through our website, oeAAA.faa.gov, we verify and validate the information, usually within 3 days, and then you'll get something back from us saying that it's been verified. We establish a study number. Now, it looks like gobbledygook there, but ASN stands for Aeronautical Study Number, the date, the region it's in, and then a sequential number for how many filings we've gotten that year. But that's very important that you use that number when you communicate with us, because we did 170,000 of these studies last year. It's real hard to find one without that number. Once we establish the study number, and you'll get that automated through the system, we coordinate it across 10 divisions. We call them divisions. And then we issue a determination or a notice of presumed hazard. The coordination process, this pretty chart. In the top, there's 5 internal offices in the FAA, such as frequency management that make sure you're not going to interfere with any of our communication systems. Technical operations, they look at radars. So every office looks at something different. But we also have to coordinate with the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, and this may come into play if you're putting a structure up in a military training route, where they fly the low-level routes, that type of thing. Or if you're near a military airport, they may come back and say, well, we have an issue, can you do this, can you do that? And then we come to a result. We like to get the result done within 15 days or 30 days. We try to do it before 45, but there's many cases that will take longer. But we come to a result. It's either favorable, we get no objections from anybody, any of the 10 divisions, plus our internal specialists like Mike, they look at certain aspects. No problem. You'll get a favorable determination. Or if we get an objection, that turns into a notice of presumed hazard. Now, a notice of presumed hazard is a letter you get from us. All it says is, we've studied it, these are the issues we see, and until this is resolved, we will presume it to be a hazard. It's more of a notice of initial findings, and it opens the door to negotiations. You have 60 days to either change the structure, and we'll tell you, you want 1,000 feet, but if you go up to 850, it'll be okay, and you may consider that. You can change the structure, you can terminate the study. Again, we get a lot of speculative filings. Or you decide that, yeah, if we move the crane over here, we're going to terminate that one and for whatever reason. Or you request further study. Now, further study is the point where we really get in and do some detailed analysis. The first thing that we do, and you'll see this in the notice of presumed hazard, is we determine if there's an adverse effect. If it affects the way an airplane flies, if they have to move courses, climb higher, descend later, that's an adverse effect. The second part of that, it has to have significant volume of activity. Now, it's not until we do further study that we normally find out if it's significant volume of activity or not. We'll say, oh no, this is going to impact Miami International Airport. They're going to have to climb higher to get out of there. Okay, no subsumed hazard. We do further study and we discover that, well, everyone can make that climb gradient. There's no airplane that can. It's within the 300 foot per nautical mile that flight standard says is okay. Then that would be no adverse effect. And we do that after the no subsumed hazard. And the determining significant volume, basically we have to say it's going to affect at least one airplane operating under visual approaches a week, visual rules, or one airplane operating under instrument rules a day. So it's a pretty low bar once we have determined that there's an aeronautical effect. But it's important because sometimes we'll tell you it'll impact this airport. Then when we do further study, we discover, guess what? No one ever flies this particular approach. No significant volume of activity. Very rarely happens, but when it does, we like it because then we can remove an approach and save us some money. And then further study, we talked about that already. Determine the extent of the adverse effect. Oh, we coordinate the further study. That's when we go and we talk to the air traffic controller. Mike will take the case and he'll say, this is what technical operations says will happen to your radar. He'll show it to the controllers and they'll say, oh, we can't live with that. That's right off the end of the approach to LA. Or they'll look at it and say, we don't care. We don't operate in that area. All of our flights are going north of there. So it makes a difference. And we send it out for public comment in some cases, particularly to find out if there's any information about this small public use airport that we don't know, people that fly in and out of there. And then it's an opportunity to propose mitigations. And there are some things we can work with you on that, particularly jump schedules. If there's going to be a small time period that you have to be at the maximum height, we can work with that. As long as the majority of the time it's below whatever the ceiling is that we've established. And the last thing I want to talk about is survey requirements before we get to the questions and answers and before Mike addresses you. Surveys are not required. You can submit them, but we won't use them. Unless there's a reason we have to have it. If it is real close to being in effect, sometimes having an accurate survey will reduce the error rate so we can compress that and find out it's right outside of the border that we're concerned about. In that case, we will ask for a survey and it has to be certified by a survey in which the project is being built. Apparently that's a problem. We get surveys from a company in Hawaii for someplace in Virginia and we say, no, this isn't working for us. So you got to get a Virginia surveyor. So that's really what I wanted to share with you. Our authority, your responsibilities. Number one, file notice, 45 days. File early, file often. With the aeronautical studies, coordinating them across everybody to come up with a good solution. And our goal is really to get it done within that 45 days. Doesn't always happen. Now, I heard you talk about what happens when schedules are delayed, when a crane's leased. Well, this is one of those things that can delay schedules, particularly if a local permitting office requires a favorable determination. And we like when that happens. To tell you the truth, if you get a determination of hazard and there's no law requiring you to contact the FAA other than the fact that you're required by law to contact us 45 days, it doesn't really mean anything. It's up to the local jurisdiction to tell you what that means. So that could be a delay for you. We talked about what to expect through the process. It's an all automated process. And so we depend on email, we depend on you going in and when you get notification that something has changed, you have to go into the system and look and see what the letter says. And that's it. Mike, did you have one to address before questions?
I would like to say a few things first. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Murray. Am I coming out okay? Okay. And his team for inviting us. We don't get to go on many of these field trips, so that was nice. Next thing, I've been married 34 years, and in our offices, I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Mike is in headquarters in D.C. So we're a virtual group. So when you file a case in California or New York or Florida, it should be done no matter where it's done. I currently work Florida. So, and Florida is extremely busy. 2 of the last 3 years, it's been the busiest state. I'm always battling with the specialists who do California and Texas. Those are the 3 busiest states. Last year, 12% of all the cases filed in this country were in Florida. That's a lot. Okay, that was almost 20,000 cases. 17% of all cranes are in Florida. So you're right. It's a very, very busy state. Now, what I do in Florida is this. Any proposal that's off airport property in the whole state of Florida, I write determinations for. And we do anything that's on military airports. Okay? What I want to emphasize about military, and then I'll get off that real quick, is when you go to our website, that OE AAA website, and that is our only website. You don't have to go anywhere else. It's going to say, do you want to file on or off airport property? They're talking about civilians, civilian airports. For a military, I know it seems like it's all against everything you believe in, but if you're filing on a military airport, file it as off airport. I know it doesn't make sense, but if you don't, it's going to go to the wrong group. Okay. Let's see what happens. Mike talked about the 10 different groups. Let's see. Oh, when he talked about, I'm going to talk about a couple of quick slides. Your cases are normally supposed to be looked at and verified in our system within 3 business days. We've gotten so many cases, usually it's maybe a couple days later than that. What's going to happen is when you submit a case to the FAA, you're going to have a portal page. It's going to have your study number, and it's going to show your status. You're not going to see what I see, but as things change on it, you'll see it. For example, when it changes to, when you first file, it's going to say accepted. When we verify your case and it goes out to the different air traffic groups, it's going to say WIP. That means it's work in progress. That's your verification that it's gone out, and we're waiting for all the air traffic groups to look at it, okay? When the determination is issued, whoever is listed as a sponsor and the rep, if you have one, they will get email notification that says your determination is done. And you go to the website and you download it right off the website. You send us no paper, we don't send you paper anymore. Let's see what else is going on. I'm going to skip around here because I made some quick notes. That notice criteria Mike was talking about, anything over 200 feet in the United States, no matter where it is, it has to be filed automatically. When you go to that website, the OE AAA website on the left-hand side, if you're not sure who works the state, look on the left-hand side, column of icons, all the way to the bottom left, it's going to say off airport contacts. Click it, it brings a map of the United States up, click it, your state, and you're going to see who works that state. If you go to Florida, you'll see me, okay? Any other state, now some specialists might work 10 states. Some might work, I only work 1 state, but it's that busy. There's a specialist who just works 1 state, California, things like that. So if you're not sure, that's the place where you find, you'll get their name, their emails, and their phone numbers. You'll also see a person that says technician. I have a technician for Florida. Her name's Terry Johnson. And what the technician does is when your case comes in, they verify your information, okay, and then send it out to air traffic. If you get anything else on your portal page after you file, for example, if you don't see WIP and you see ADD, ADD, that means somebody's asking you for additional information. Do not ignore that, because say your site elevation was 8 feet, and whoever entered your case fat-fingered it and made it 88 feet. The technician's going to send you an ad letter and say, hey, we show it 8 feet, you show it 88 feet, what's going on? In other words, if you get that ad letter, no one's looking at your case except you. And if you don't respond to it after 30 days, the case is going to be terminated. So if you see something different or weird, ask. okay? Because it's something as simple as that, you could have responded right back immediately. I'm going to give you some examples of some things that crane guys have come to me over the past. If you're going to work in a large area, and you're either going to have one crane that moves around or multiple cranes, what I strongly suggest you do is find out who works at state, send them an email with a satellite picture before you file anything. Make the picture of how big your area is going to be, and we will help you to tell you how many cranes you need to file. It might be just as easy as 4 corners, maybe just 4 cranes. If it's a big area, I might pick out different spots, but there's a reason I'm picking out spots. Maybe one's the highest point, maybe one's the closest to the airport, but if we make you file multiple cranes, we're not trying to kill you. I already know from doing this for 20 years, a lot of these air traffic groups are asking for different stuff that I'm trying to save you time in the long run, because if you file one crane and they come back and say, well, they said they want to file multiple cranes, then we're going to have to play phone tag or email tag or whatever you want to call it, and it's just costing you time when we can be studying this crane. Now, okay. When the divisions respond, the first thing I can't do anything for you until I get all the divisions that look at it. Fortunately for cranes, we do not have to get as many responses that we do for a permanent structure, okay? We also give a lot of liberties to cranes. I normally do not issue a presumed hazard for a crane unless there's something in that presumed hazard that we cannot live with. Okay, so Mike and I we're both air traffic controllers. Okay, then we went to obstruction evaluation. Mike did other stuff too, but the point what I'm trying to talk to you is when we were air traffic controllers, they speak a foreign language. We don't speak English to each other, okay? We don't speak English to pilots. We speak a different language. So the hardest thing that we had to adapt to is when we get responses back from these different air traffic divisions, they speak in air traffic talk. We have to translate what they say so when you get it or somebody off the street, they can understand what the letter means. It's just converting what they're trying to tell us to what we know. Ian, you ready? Okay. All right, well, Mike tells me we better do some questions before we run out of time here. So, but again, if you have questions, I don't mind somebody sending me an email or send it to the specialist that works your state. If there's any question at all, because I'd rather you ask the question first than go through the whole process and something goes wrong and then you have to refile. So we're more than happy to answer anything you got.
Okay, with that, if we can get the microphone up.
Well, I can
up front here.
I can repeat the question too.
Or yeah, we can repeat the question. And this is our favorite part, because we want to know what you need to know.
Moan. Okay. First of all, thanks for being here. SCNR, we've been working at a period of time and discussing this topic. One question I have, I know you handle a lot of volume as far as the submittals that you have. And I've noticed on the notice criteria that you have on the website, a few years ago, the volume was high and the delays was 45, 90 days. And I think as a suggestion, I'm not picking on you, if you go to the notice criteria today and you put in all the information, it still tells you to file even if you're low. I did it this morning right in front of the hotel, and I put an elevation of 6 feet, and it's still saying to file. I think maybe you guys need to look at that and adjust that metrics to that piece so it might take some of the load off of you.
Yeah, if we don't, I don't want to go into the history of that, but we're aware of that. One thing it does not consider is shielding and some other things. So you're in an area that even 6 feet could be a problem, even though we know because of other things around it, it won't be. The tool is not yet to that point, but we have that feedback. I appreciate it.
5 years ago, I'll just say that, that tool was a hell of a lot better. And what we did was we went to the different air traffic divisions. Long story short, We told them to condense what they wanted to look at. No, they didn't. They wanted to expand their empires. So virtually, if you filed a tool shed in your backyard 20 miles from an airport, it's probably going to tell you to file.
Right, that's correct.
Now,
you and I have had this
all I can
conversation.
tell you, though, if it says you have to file and you don't file, you take on that risk. Because if something, God forbid, an aviation accident or something ever happened, and you're sitting in the court, and the first question that comes out is, were you required to have it studied? It's either going to get real bad after that or real good after that. So take that for a grain of salt. We are working on that.
And I know you and I had this conversation about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Any other questions? One over here on the left, if we can get a microphone, or start off and I'll repeat it.
Yes, sir.
One of the issues that we run into as a contractor is
Right behind you.
One of the issues we're running into as contractors is the architects are responsible for filing the permit for the permanent structure. And lots of times the architects don't do that timely. And when we file to erect a crane, a tower crane particularly here in Miami or in some other areas, it delays our temporary permit because the permit building isn't there. And so I don't know how you fix that or what you do, but I've got a situation in Nashville where that's happening right now.
Okay, policy. That's a policy question. Yes, in the past years, our policy has been hold up the crane as leverage to get them to file the building, because it's important for us to have the building filed. We've clarified our policy for our specialists and technicians to ask the question, hold up the crane, ask them, hey, what's this for? Where's the permit? Get them to file. But then when you come back and say, can't do anything with it, then we're going to press on with your study. We understand, but it doesn't do us any good in the aviation world to study the crane, but then have a problem with the building or vice versa.
Can you hear me? I've changed over the years. Years ago, I did not approve the crane, and I'm an old dog, so I did not approve the crane until the permanent structure was approved. Okay? I have changed over the years. What now is, I am not going to hold the crane guy up because he's a total separate entity, and I know you guys can do a lot of work on the ground or moving stuff or whatever you have to do. So, but you're right. Our problem is if the permanent structure ends up being a problem or a hazard, and we're basically having a crane operate on a hazard. So now some people are going to send you an ad letter, what I talked about earlier, saying that, hey, are you guys filing, for the permanent structure? You need to respond to that letter. Whoever sent you that letter is the person you need to respond to, because give them whatever you have to, or you talk to the owner of the building, whatever you have to do, and the owner is responsible for determining whether he needs to have that study filed or not. We don't chase the owner, but if it's required to be filed and he doesn't do it, and something happens, they're going to sue everybody, including your grandmom, to get money. Okay, sorry.
Because we have a workforce all across the country that does this, we have annual training. We did that just last month, and that was something we discussed because I know there's a little inconsistency, and I'll make sure we get word out on that again, particularly if things are being held up now.
The other portion to that would be in these high-rise structures in Miami, if the building gets, let's say the building's 700 feet, the building's in the flight path, and we know that it's coming in up here. You have to have a tower crane that's going to be above the building to build it. And Mike, you worked with me on one right up the street here to LSA to where we worked underneath the IR limit, and then once we get to the top, we're going to have to go through it for a portion of that.
Okay, so let's even build it up higher. Let's say somebody's going to build a 1,000-foot building, and somebody immediately files for a crane at 1,200 feet tall. I may have to kill a forest writing up all the effects of that crane because it affects everything. We're not going to tie up that airspace when that size crane may not be used for a year and a half. So what I'll usually do is come back to you. I will write you a presumed hazard, hoping that you're going to come back and talk to me to find out how, and I'm going to try to give you a crane maybe at 500 feet tall right away so that you can work on it maybe for a year, and then we'll step it up. So that's where, a big cranes, we're not going to give, we can't. One presumed hazard thing is anything at 501 or above is automatically going to get a presumed hazard because it exceeds A1. There's all sorts of things you can exceed. There's things that we can accept right away, we can live with, other stuff we can't. What I'm mainly concerned about is affecting procedures at airports, but why would I affect those procedures until I have to? Because there's a lot, now, when you guys get stuff from us, unless it's been put out for public comment, the only people who have looked at your stuff is air traffic. That's it. That's it. There's nobody in the public. If you get a presumed hazard, nobody knows about your presumed hazard unless you say something about it, because that's no longer public.
That's a recent change.
That's a recent change. Several years ago, we were publishing, but then it was a notice of presumed hazard. It's not a determination. Okay, so. One other thing I'll say about...
Did we answer that? Okay.
One other thing I'll say about presumed hazards, sometimes when you see it on page 1, let's say you file for a 600-foot crane, and the no effect height on the front page, it's right there, about the third paragraph, it's going to say, no effect height 200 feet. And you're going to say, what? What that means is, that's not the final height that you could get. What that's just going to tell you is, at that height, there's no effect to the airspace at all. So what you have to do is go to the third page, and hopefully there's not 4 pages, because after that you got a lot of stuff going on. But look to see what the different effects are. And if you don't understand them or how tall, call me up or write me and say, hey, Mike, what can we really get? And I'll tell you, I'll give you an exact height. Because because there may be multiple things that are going to be a problem, and a lot of them we can live with, or the situation you're referring to is, if it's going to affect something at a facility, there may be a lot of talk behind the scenes that you don't know about to coordinate this thing. Whether it's an airway, being raised, if it's a minimum vectoring altitude, that's not a pilot thing, that's an air traffic deal, that's internal. There may be, if you affect a navigational device, like a PAPI, a precision approach path indicator, if you affect a VOR, these are things that affect air traffic, and we may have to get something where we take it out of, out for a while, out of service. So don't think we're delaying your case. There's stuff going on behind the scenes.
We're almost out of time. We do have time for one more question. I see one over here. Now, Mike and I will be staying here all day. You'll see us around, so feel free, if you have a particular case you want to talk to about, trap us on that. Just look for the 2 good-looking guys with the glasses on. That'll be us.
Who is ultimately responsible for filing?
Well, that came up the other day, and I wrote to the guy and I said, he says, is it the person who owns the building? Or I said, I don't care, just as long as somebody files for it. Okay, if I was a crane guy and the owner who may not know anything about how you file or your crane heights or anything like that, then I would do it if I was a crane guy. Okay, go ahead.
The law says that anybody erecting a structure that meets notice criteria must notify the FAA 45 days prior. That's all the law says. Now, whoever's running the project needs to understand, okay, by agreement, who's going to do this. So the law is a little bit vague, just anybody building something that meets notice criteria.
I've also told the owner of a building, if he's filed for a 500-foot condominium and he doesn't know who he's going to hire as a crane guy, I tell him, you can file an additional case. You can file just to give the crane, you can file a case for 700 feet if you want. That way, at least it's going in the system. So whoever comes in there, all he has to do is change the name of the sponsor on there, and at least the crane guy will have that height already in, rather than starting from nothing. In other words, if the building takes several months to approve, that crane could be moving all along in the system, and if he comes to you and hires you, at least he could tell you, look, I've already filed for this height, and at least you know you had that height to work with for right now. If you need greater, then you're going to have to refile a height increase.
Okay, thank you all for your patience.
Thank you.
And we will be around for any other questions.